Oh yeah, so if folks, I'll repeat this a few times, but if folks have any questions they'd like to ask, please send them to, send them via the chat to Berkeley Tenants Union, and that way we'll have all your questions or anything else you'd like us to know, and I'll communicate it with the other steering committee members. Oh, and in a few minutes, I'm going to post the sign-in sheet so that folks who are in attendance can sign in.
Hello.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthew, for muting us.
Okay, what time is it? Should we?
Alert audio now unmuted.
Okay.
Go ahead, Julia.
Okay, should we start now or should we give people a little more time?
It's 5:10.
Okay, I guess we should give people more time. We've got 21 people here. Okay. My name is Julia Cato, and I am the current chair of the steering committee of the Berkeley Tenants Union, and I welcome all of you. It's good to see you here. BTU has been pretty busy during the pandemic, and I'd like to give you an update on what we've been doing. We have not been idle. We have worked, first of all, with Friends of Adeline to lobby for social and racial justice in the South Berkeley Adeline community regarding the changes the city plans for the Adeline corridor. We have called a press conference to inform the community of UCB's intent to purchase and ultimately demolish a rent-controlled building and evicting a number of long-term tenants.
Well, Commissioner, the meeting.
Unfortunately, that was successful on the part of UCB. So we have lost a number of rent-controlled units and a number of people have lost their homes as a result of their actions. We held another press conference to inform the public about UCB's intention to withhold the right to register from students who have failed to pay their rent to UCB, which I think that is still under discussion. We're still holding our monthly legal counseling clinics, and people are still attending.
Jay has joined the meeting. Alert Daya Michaels has joined the meeting.
Where did that come from?
Alert Emma Ishii, she/her, AC Supervisor Carson's office has joined the meeting.
Well, welcome. And we are working with Topa, and we have a representative in that group to lobby for their next step. And there's lots more that we are going to be working on in the coming weeks and months. Tonight we have a full agenda. We're going to have Leah Simon Weisberg talk to us about current tenant protections and the loss of some tenant protections as they pertain to Berkeley tenants, both state, county, and city protections and loss of protections. Steve Martineau is going to speak to us about the next steps that Friends of Adeline are taking in order to lobby and hopefully persuade the city into a position of more racial and community justice for the Adeline corridor. And we will work with them to accomplish that. We will have Paula Laverty speaking on Topa. And we have a representative from the Oakland Tenants Union to tell us what the Oakland tenants are doing. And now, if we have no further episodes, Leah, are you here?
I am.
Okay.
Before Leah starts, just for folks who joined a bit late, please go. In order to sign in, please go to the chat, and we posted the Google link for the sign-in sheet, as well as instructions for how to pay dues. We'll keep reposting that. But yeah, so please sign in so we know you're here and can record that. And I'll just make that announcement a few more times as people continue coming into the meeting. Important notice. The following presentation primarily focuses on the statewide eviction moratorium law. Berkeley law and the countywide law prohibit evictions except for health and safety reasons, which cannot be a COVID-19 infection or through the so-called Ellis Act. Not paying rent for any reason is not a valid reason for a landlord to engage in an eviction under the local eviction moratorium law. Unlike state law, local law does not require you to pay 25% of your rent to stop an eviction. Under local law, if the reason why you are not paying rent is related to COVID-19, broadly defined, then your landlord can never evict you for unpaid rent, even after the pandemic/eviction moratorium ends. Nothing in this notice or this video should be construed as formal legal advice. Please speak to an attorney or rent board staff for formal legal advice about your rights as a tenant in your specific situation, including under this law. Tenants should not withhold any rent payments without first speaking to a licensed tenant attorney about their specific situation. Additionally, UC Berkeley is not necessarily bound by these local ordinances, but is bound by the state and federal eviction moratoriums.
Okay. I'd like to introduce now Leah Simon Weisberg, who is, are you counsel for ACE? Is that your title?
I'm the legal director.
Okay, legal director for ACE. She's also the chair of the Berkeley Rent Board Commission. And she is going to give us the latest updates on the pandemic protections for tenants. Leah.
Great. I'm going to just try and share my computer real fast so I can use this PowerPoint. And always takes a minute. So first, I just really want to thank Berkeley Tenants Union for inviting me today. And I just want to take 2 seconds to really highlight the fact that Berkeley's Rent Board is elected, which is something that is unique in our state and really also explains why we have one of the strongest rent control ordinances. And, you know, when the pandemic came, we also continue to have one of the strongest eviction moratoriums. And obviously that's to ensure that tenants, you know, play a big role in the protections. And that's because we're elected. And we generally, I think many of you know, and we were able to have a, you know, clear sweep of the tenant convention endorsed and really selected slate because of the amazing work that the Berkeley Tenants Union did. So every 2 years we are, you know, we have to, again, support people in our community to run so that we can continue to have, you know, a really strong elected board. So I just want to take this opportunity to plant that in your heads, because we will need, every 2 years, we need a couple more folks. And it's an ongoing thing. And, you know, ensuring that we are protected is something that never goes away. For folks who don't remember, the National Association of Realtors spent $137,000 to try and stop, you know, the pro-tenant slate from getting elected, and instead replace it with people who were avidly against rent control. So please feel free to reach out to any of the folks on the board. We obviously have many active members, and, you know, particularly our most recent chair, Paolo Laverde, you know, obviously Dominique Walker, Mari Mendoza, Andy Kelly, and Xavier. We all just went through the election process, but we also have Paula and James Chang, and of course, John Slowski, who will be losing in the next election. So please reach out to us so we can tell more. Okay, the other thing that we won is we passed Measure MM, which immediately protected a bunch of buildings where if we hadn't passed MM by the landlords building an ADU, all of the tenants would have lost protection. So that was really significant. It also protected our ability to do an eviction moratorium that is in our ballot. So, I mean, is in our ordinance. All right, so run. So today, kind of with a little bit of a different hat, I'm going to be talking about kind of what the impact is on the extension of the eviction moratorium at the state level. And initially, I'm kind of going to give this presentation with the assumption that people had a general understanding of the prior statewide eviction moratorium, which we refer to as AB 3088. The extension was SB 91. And one of the big differences is that it has not only the eviction moratorium, but it also addresses rent relief. And that I'll be talking mostly about that piece today. So that's what, and then, so anyway, that's what I'm gonna cover. And then obviously how does it impact those of us in Berkeley, where obviously we have great local protections, and does, you know, the state tried to muzzle us. I mean, in many ways, many people feel that the reason the apartment association supported any of this is because, God forbid, they have Berkeley style everywhere. So what does SB 91 do? And this, everyone needs to remember, this is just what the state law provides. And this is not an interplay with what does it mean for us in Berkeley, because we have stronger protections, but I'll be reviewing that later on. So for a tenant who lives somewhere that doesn't have its own eviction moratorium, what SB 91 does is it continues the bar against evictions solely on the basis of non-payment of rent when the rent owed, it was due to a decrease in income, or, and also it's broader than that. It's, you know, if you had an additional medical expenses, if you have had to give up some of your hours because now you have childcare needs, and all of those things. Under the state law, you have to provide, the landlord must provide a 15-day notice, attached with it a declaration saying they can't evict you for this because this money that has accrued that you owe is due to a COVID-related decrease in income or increase in costs. In addition, what it did is it did take kind of what Oakland, Alameda County, and the city of Berkeley have, which is it said you can't evict, but this rent that is accrued becomes consumer debt. I think it's also important, and one of the themes I'll be talking about today is that, from my perspective, our thinking really needs to move to the debt piece. I think California has successfully, which was started in our county with this concept of taking away the leverage landlords had to basically evict tenants, to force them to prioritize the debt to the landlord over food, healthcare, childcare, all these other you know, basic needs. So the rent accrued from April of 2020 through August 2020 is consumer debt, and the tenant doesn't have to pay $1 of it to continue to be protected from eviction. However, from September 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, the tenant, to continue to have these protections and that the landlord cannot evict you, you need to be able to pay 25% of the rent that would have normally accrued. So 25% of your rent, and it doesn't have to be each month. You don't have to pay it 25 that each month. You don't have to pay it essentially until July 1st. Now, again, this is not taking into consideration Berkeley's local laws. So this is just giving you the clean, what SB 91 does. So people shouldn't suddenly be like, wait, that's not what I thought it to be here in Berkeley. So, and this is, and I just want to point out these dates where before the law protected us through January 31st, and it was May 1st when all that rent had to be paid. Now it's all been pushed to July 1st. And I think that, you know, for those of us who were part of this movement to get Berkeley, Oakland, and Alameda, and ultimately Alameda County, and then ultimately the state to convert the money to debt, is that it gives us time to deal with the debt, that we're not facing an immediate eviction. So the other huge part, because essentially what I just described, with the exception of kind of the extension of the time frame, is no different than what SB 3888 did. What 91 did was it started addressing this consumer debt, right? And what it has done is that it's created a structure of how the state is going to provide rental assistance. So what they did is they created a program that basically allows the landlords to apply directly to the government. They've made it a voluntary program with the idea, they've done all these different things to kind of force landlords to apply for it instead of going after their tenant. So from the perspective of we're trying to get rid of the debt, you know, this is not the worst thing in the world. I think there's definitely some analysis that we need to talk about, which is why landlords versus so many other industries that are suffering right now. But let's just understand the program, and then we can obviously have the analysis of was it the best way or not. So what the state is providing is that if a landlord applies to the state program, they can receive 80% of the rent owed, but in exchange, they have to waive 20%. Now, if the landlord refuses to apply for this money, then the tenants are allowed to apply themselves directly for that 25%, which guarantees their defense against an eviction. Now, the difficulty is, well, so what happens to the other 75% if the landlord refuses to participate in the program? So the strategy is that they have limited the places and how a landlord can get that money, so that they'll seem even more irrational from a business perspective for them not to apply for it, because why would you refuse 80% if, if basically you can't get more than 25%? Now, I think we all know why they might not do it, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the other ways that the program has encouraged landlords to do it is that they can't file a breach of contract case in regular superior court for the rent until August 1st, and they can't go to small claims, and they can't assign or sell the debt during this period. So the idea is you can go, at least until August. If you don't apply, you're not going to be able to do it. And this, I want to also bring up another theme. Much of this is temporary, and it only goes through like rent owed in June and kind of deadlines that end in August. Now, I want everyone to remember that we had the same kind of structure where it was a January 31st date. And so one of the things I feel like and this is my personal view and the analysis I'm sharing, is that we need to know that we are going to keep fighting until everybody's debt is gone. We are going to keep fighting until we've ensured that every tenant gets to continue in their home. So some of that is being patient and not getting sucked into the deadlines they are creating, and realizing that while 4 months doesn't, like June isn't very far away, but at the same time, it's time. It has the time that we need. So obviously, just in terms of the structure, we're concerned that because it's not required, that how is the landlord going to, we just know that there are landlords who they're just not going to pay. They're going to be like, I'm not taking the program for the tenants who ask for repairs. I'm not going to apply for the program for any of the people of color who live in my building, or the long-term tenants, or someone with a disability. So there's all kinds of issues that we're very concerned about. So, but anyway, moving on into just understanding what this all means, is that this program is based on basically using all of the federal funds that California is anticipating. So the federal government has allocated $25 billion to paying rental assistance across the United States. California is getting $2.6 billion. About half of that is going directly to the state, and about half of that is going, so 1.5 billion is going directly to the state, and 1.1 is going to the entitlement cities and counties. And to be an entitlement city and county in California means it's based on population. So if you are in a city that has over 200,000 people, then you are an entitlement, and you will get the federal funds directly. If you are a town like Berkeley that is smaller than 200,000, we are not getting any money directly. All of our rental assistance is going directly to the county for them to disperse. And in contrast, Oakland is getting its direct amount. So what this program allocates is that, so these different entitlement jurisdictions will receive their federal funding directly. And then there's this money that goes to the state, and then they can choose whether to receive the state portion through a block grant and administer it themselves, right? So on Friday, all of these jurisdictions, entitlement jurisdictions, had to decide if they would do one of three things. And while I have it as 1, 2, and 3, it's A, B, and C. And I don't know how many of you all, from work reasons or somehow, or were on other, I know Housing Now had a discussion. But essentially there are three options. One is they turn all of their money over, so Oakland could say, we don't want any federal funds. We don't want to run the block. We're not administering anything. Just the state's going to do everything. Or they could do plan B, then I have on the flyer, on the slide as 2, accept all the federal funds and apply for a block grant from the state and self-administer it. The third option is to opt out of the block grant from the state and only administer the federal funds. And again, all of that was due on Friday. So I'm going to pause on that piece and we can come back to that because I can give you like an update on what we've been hearing around the state in terms of who's decided to do what. But so getting back to the program requirements priorities, landlords, there are no requirements or priorities. All landlords get to apply. It's a free-for-all. Obviously, we're really concerned that it's going to be a bunch of the corporate landlords and, at the expense of smaller landlords or even nonprofits. They have had some income loss. On the tenant side, of course, is where they've been micromanaging this. And the requirement, and this is from the federal law, is that the rent has to be provided for COVID-19 related decreases in income resulting in an inability to pay rent. And it can only be provided to tenants who make 80% of AMI. Now, as I think many of us realize that our cost of living is so incredibly high that if you are renting, it's pretty damn likely that you make less than 80% of AMI. And particularly in the last 12 months, you've been making less because pretty much everybody has lost a decrease in their household. But there are going to be some folks, but then they probably have been paying their rent. Then the state has put another layer of priorities, and they're calling it rounds, which is that they want the first round to go for tenants who make less than 50% of AMI. And then the next round will be for people who are most impacted. And a lot of folks think that has to do, the law is very vague. There have been presentations done by the governor's office and from the administration that indicate that they're talking about frontline workers, they're talking about, Black and brown communities. And then the third round, if there's money left, are supposed to go to any tenant who makes less than 80% of AMI. So I think one of the concerns is how is this all going to be in a mix? And the structure that the state is presented us with is that there's literally going to be just a website. Hello? And and they have one nonprofit that's going to be running it for the state. That may work great, or it may be a problem. Obviously, we've had some difficulty in getting unemployment out, which is a similar concept for the state. And we're also really concerned about how, if it's based on the tenant's income, how is the tenant going to safely provide that private information? Like we've seen landlords across the state demanding that tenants start providing them private information that is not required by their local ordinances. So
Leo, we are running a little out of time. Could you condense it a little bit so we can?
Yeah. So my main thing is what we need to be looking at is how are we monitoring the situation? How are we monitoring who's receiving the funds? And that's, I think, one of the things we need to be paying attention to. So in terms of what does this all mean for Berkeley? Obviously, we still have an extremely strong ordinance. These are numbers that came out of a KQED article that I hope everybody had opportunity to see, and obviously see Alameda County. We literally had only 8, none of which were in Berkeley. There's also an interactive map per city. Berkeley had 0. So really, in this time period, we didn't lose any, and these are sheriff evictions. So that doesn't mean that there weren't negotiations, but that's where people literally were removed by the sheriff. So I think we all should be really proud of that. This is actually the link to the article, but you just need to, you can go to the KQED website under housing and you'll see it. So I think obviously this stage is about debt, and we really need to be paying attention to, you know, what does that mean? Berkeley often gets under-serviced by county programs. So we need to make sure that this time, because we're literally not getting anything except for it, that we need to make sure that our tenants are getting their fair share. The other thing I do want to say is that while our Berkeley's rent program, our eviction moratorium does not require that you provide a notice or provide the declaration back, many of the protections around the debt, and that landlords can't be filing in state court or go to small claims or sell the debt, is tied to the declaration. So really, for the first time, we're saying to Berkeley tenants, if you get a 15-day notice, provide that declaration.
Thank you, Leah, very much. Thank you very much.
Great. Sorry about that. I lost perspective on time.
So folks who have questions should post them in the chat. We had one question and I'm going to anonymize all questions. But one person did ask, my landlord does not live here, but when I saw him, he was not wearing a mask, and he has not inspected my apartment for a year, and the fire and carbon alarms went out. I'm very ill, so I am afraid. I think we're mostly keeping the questions towards this topic, but should this person contact the rent board, or we've sent them the information for our upcoming counseling clinic, but for something like this, do they talk to the rent board or a different agency?
I think it's always important to start first with the rent board. And they may also ask you to contact code enforcement to, ask for essentially the same situation where, it's illegal for them not to make those repairs. But you can demand that your landlord wear a mask before they come in.
Yeah, and we'll follow up with that person, but we just wanted to make sure they got that answered. So so for folks who came in late, please ask your questions via the chat. And additionally, I'm posting in the chat the sign-in sheet, which is a Google form, as well as how to pay, as well as instructions on how to pay dues. So everybody who's here should fill out the sign-in sheet, so that we know you're here. We can mark you for the purposes of like membership purposes, so you can vote. And we just had a question. We just had another question, which was, are evictions for reasons other than rent allowed now? This is not acting on an unreasonable request by management.
So no evictions are allowed right now if you live in the city of Berkeley, with the exception of health and safety, or so as long as it's not a health and safety reason, Berkeley bars all other evictions, including Ellis, which is very exciting. And that was really because BTU fought for that. Are there any other questions? Because I just was going to say one last thing before I jump off.
I have a question, Leah. I have been told that when the tenant's rent debt converts to consumer debt cannot be used as a cause of non-payment of rent. Is that true?
That is absolutely correct. And that's why it's consumer debt. That's why we're calling it consumer debt, because once it's just consumer debt, then we're differentiating it from rent that can be used as the basis for an eviction.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Leah. Thank you.
And I have one question for Leah. Leah, you mentioned the additional protections BTU fought for, like the ban on Ellis Act evictions. but please correct me if I'm wrong, didn't SB 91 prevent those from taking effect until the new, not the existing Berkeley protections, but any additional ones from taking effect until July 1st?
I'm going to skirt the answer to that question because I think that many of us are debating that. It is my opinion that any of the strengthening that we did that had to do with eviction defense, we are able to do. So Ellis, for example, is included in that, that the preemption was only about non-payment. So for example, we have in our, we talked about like when rent becomes due, and I don't think that, and that conflicts directly with the state law that they specifically preempted. But when it comes to eviction, I don't think it has to wait till July. That is my.
Thank you so much for that clarity. And for all our members, we're going to go look. We're going to do research into that after this meeting, so that we can provide you all with the as surefire an answer as we can. So thank you so much for that, Leah. That's really good news.
The one thing I just want to say before I jump off is I just really want to encourage people to come to the rent board meetings. We basically we rarely have anyone other than when the landlords show up, and there's, they'll just have hundreds of them that gets distorted, and it makes people think that somehow they represent Berkeley. So just really want to encourage folks to come see our show. We'll be there next Thursday. And we actually have a great speaker that Paula Verde and Mari Mendonça, the two commissioners, have put together that'll be honoring the prior mayor, Gus Newport, and he'll be also sharing with us his experience of the early rent control days in honor of Black History Month.
Thank you, Leah.
Important notice: the previous presentation primarily focused on the statewide eviction moratorium law. Berkeley law and the countywide law prohibit evictions except for health and safety reasons, which cannot be a COVID-19 infection or through the so-called Ellis Act. Not paying rent for any reason is not a valid reason for a landlord to engage in an eviction under the local eviction moratorium law. Unlike state law, local law does not require you to pay 25% of your rent to stop an eviction. Under local law, if the reason why you are not paying rent is related to COVID-19, broadly defined, then your landlord can never evict you for unpaid rent, even after the pandemic/eviction moratorium ends. Nothing in this notice or this video should be construed as formal legal advice. Please speak to an attorney or rent board staff for formal legal advice about your rights as a tenant in your specific situation, including under this law. Tenants should not withhold any rent payments without first speaking to a licensed tenant attorney about their specific situation. Additionally, UC Berkeley is not necessarily bound by these local ordinances, but is bound by the state and federal eviction moratoriums.
And for the person who asked, does BTU have referrals for pro-tenant lawyers when they are, if you need to speak to, if you have an issue, if you haven't reached out, send us an email if you need to get a hold of a lawyer, and we'll try to help connect you with somebody.
Okay. Our next speaker is Steve Mugno, who is speaking for Friends of Adeline and giving us an update on what is happening with the city's restructuring of South Berkeley. Steve, are you here?
Okay.
Are you muted?
I think he's muted. Give me one. I just let in a bunch of people. I think we have Willie at minimum. So Willie. I'm gonna ask. So I'm unmuting Willie. I'm not certain because I think you're on the phone. You're gonna have to push star something to unmute. Well, I think he just did. Willie, is that you that I just unmuted?
I believe so. Can you hear
Willie,
me, by the way?
Are
Yes.
you speaking instead of Steve?
Well, it was that both me as well as Steve were to speak, actually, and jointly, actually. And I guess, I don't know if Steve is aware, but I emailed him to remind him. So
Okay.
Perhaps he may come
Okay,
on
so it
later.
looks like it's just going to be Willie. Willie, before
Okay,
you start,
Matthew, I'll take it from there.
Okay, well, I
Okay.
just have an announcement who just came
If
in,
you,
which is please sign in. Look for the sign-in sheet link in the chat.
okay, Matthew. Okay, speaking for the Friends of Adeline is going to be Willie Phillips, who's a longtime Berkeley activist and has been particularly active in Friends of Adeline in the last few years. Okay, Willie.
Thank you, Julie. I ought to give shouts out to Paula and Matthew. Just saw Matthew. Didn't we just see each other yesterday? But I wanted to really kind of acknowledge, since it is African History Month, perhaps it might be good to explore the past and where we are now and possibly the future. I'll try to be brief.
Yeah, you have 15 minutes, Willie.
I'm not going to even take that. I'm going to be very, very, I know people like to talk. I don't, to be honest with you. I think that is much more important to have action. And it becomes very clear that a lot of times we kind of get caught in that particular mode. But I think it's important to realize that there is a past that plays a very critical role. And because it is, again, African History Month, basically South Berkeley, which basically Friends of Adeline came out of, basically was predominantly African American. And most of it was based on the very fact is that there was issues around covenants and redlining, in which in part still exists to this day. But I want to basically be able to elaborate, because part of the fight that's going on now, or the challenges that we're dealing with, is revolving around one of the biggest properties in Berkeley. It's the South Berkeley BART and how that came about. I don't know if many of you know that one of the first particular presidents of BART was an African American who was by the name of Will Ursery. And Will was one of the people who pioneered the issue of using fiber optics before it actually even became something that's now become a normal thing, in terms that they're now using, basically going into neighborhoods, and they are converting various neighborhoods in terms of direct fiber optics. But he saw that vision even then. He was involved in the beginning stage. And when I was growing up, essentially, that BART, which exists now, which was a whole, was something that literally took years to be developed. And I think many of you may not be aware that there was another African American who played a very critical role in that, by the name of Mabel Howard. Mabel Howard was an activist of activists, and certainly was very much responsible for people that you may know, like Dellums, among other things, Maudel Sherrick. And you can go by the fact that she was a community organizer, by the fact that she had the experience of being a union organizer prior to her being involved in local politics. But the very fact that many people fought the very fact that the BART was going to be disruptive. And if you see the pattern throughout America, you see that various particular things are used to divide whites and blacks in neighborhoods. Railroad tracks and highways. And when you look at the very fact that was what BART was going to do, was going to divide a neighborhood, many of you may not know that African Americans were not welcome above Martin Luther King, which was basically where the invisible line was enforced by covenants through basically deeds. That may still exist even presently based on economics. If you look at the very fact is that many African Americans are now leaving, and we always have to ask why. But I think when you look at the history in terms of these heroes that played a very critical role, I think that most of you on this particular this room, that virtual room that we're talking on now, probably not even aware of these people, you know, in terms of what they were able to do and what obstacles they had to basically deal with in order to basically do that. That was not only a horrendous task for Mrs. Mabels to actually do that, but the very fact that she basically stopped a whole force that was going to basically divide Berkeley through having BART above ground. They sued and they were able to win. Dellums was part of that group at that time. And for the most part, that is the reason why BART is underground. One of the other issues that have really kind of divided Berkeley has been essentially covenants. Many of you may know the name Rumford, Byron Rumford. Byron Rumford was the first African American to be elected in Northern California. And he came out of...
Sorry to interrupt you, Willie. I just want to share with the group. I'm sorry to interrupt, but at the very end of the meeting, there is a 3-minute, 10-second documentary on Byron Rumford, the father of housing in California. We're going to be sharing that later on.
Thank you. I think that also you should be able to share Welcome to the Neighborhood. That will give you a lot of in-depth detail in terms of actually Mrs. Howard as well, actually. But I think that part of it is that when people come here, they create history, false narratives that allows me to say that they're distorting history based on the fact that they don't care about the history, about the issues that precedes them. And it becomes very arrogant by the fact that why create your own history when there was really history that actually allowed people, based on discrimination, based on the challenge of racism, based on the institutionalized as well as structural racism, that really basically allows me to say that the very fact is that that's what we're fighting. And I think that it really allows me to say that when Rumford basically was able to do what he was able to do by coming up with a law, which now we're dealing with a moratorium on rent, but the very fact that it was illegal to discriminate on terms of race, that was revolutionary. That law passed, and then there was essentially a proposition that was made where California basically voted it down. That tells you about the state of America. That tells you the state of basically California at that time. It was basically restated by the Supreme Court. Isn't that kind of ironic, by the fact that you know the mentality of people and how people react and what the African Americans have to deal with even to this day? But it also gives me some indication too that when we look at now, as in terms of what we are dealing with, in terms of the barriers that we're dealing with, and the formation of Friends of Adeline, we can see the contradictions in terms of when someone in the city in the leadership role would basically state the very fact that South Berkeley was a colony. This was in public. This was actually in a meeting with one of the first meetings that was in regards to the Adeline Corridor project, which has been ongoing for years. In the meantime, African Americans are still dwindling, and if we are at a point now where essentially we may actually end up being 8%, 7%, perhaps even 5%. But at one point in time, South Berkeley was a vital area in which you had 40% African American. In fact, that was where African Americans resided because they could not live in North Berkeley, which still exists now. Isn't that ironic, may I add? But I'm looking at it in terms of the fact is that we're dealing with the contradiction of society, and we're looking at why certain things are important to really be able to deal with just by the fact that it's relevant now. Black Lives Matter mattered then, but now it's become a coined phrase. Do Black lives really matter when we still practice discrimination? Do Black lives matter when an organization like Friends of Adeline have to fight tooth and nail to be able to recognize that African Americans, in terms of the damage that has been done, in particular with the BART station, that people were displaced, that they need to be made whole? That comes down to what we are dealing with now. We're dealing with the very fact is that we're trying to re-step the steps of those people that were before us, like Byron Rumford, like Taria Hall Pittman, like, even for that matter, actually Charles Austin, who recognized the contribution that Taria Hall basically contributed in terms of working with Rumford because she was the regional director in NAACP. We now know her by the fact that there is a library named after her. These are unsung heroes that actually contributed to what exists now. And to some extent, what we need to do in terms of recognizing the very fact that that history that exists now, we are still challenged with at this moment in time. So why is it important to basically recognize this? It's important by the fact that we as a community must be able to recognize that there has been ongoing discrimination that exists now, and we must fight against that and must win. If it deals with housing, if it deals with health, if it deals with education, we still must win. We must make a difference. And I say that because the very fact that we live in Berkeley, that's been recognized as being the most liberal particular city and most equitable city in the country. Do we actually really live up to that reputation? No. But at the same time, I'm asking everyone on this, in this particular meeting here, to be able to step up, because there is no reason to say that this particular community is whole. And I say that with a lot of particular, reservation by the fact that I was born here 65 years ago, and I have not seen it worse over my 65 years than it is now. Again, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak. And again, I'm not in any way have any particular malice, but I'm just telling you the truth. If you can't hear that, that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that. But again, I want to thank you for your time.
And can I ask you, Willie, so how can Berkeley Tenants Union assist with Friends of Adeline so that we can move a progressive agenda of right of return? How can we help you?
Well, showing up. Another thing, too, is that Friends of Adeline played a very critical role in doing an equity summit. And that equity summit was basically set up so that allies could hear the pain of Black people. It's not for white people to use it as their platform in terms of what they're doing for Black people, but it's for Black people to basically empower themselves. Showing up plays a very critical role, but listening plays even a better role.
Thank you, Willie.
Thank you, Willie. Are there any questions? Okay, Betsy, unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Oh,
Betsy, yeah, you can be
okay.
unmuted now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Willie, this is a follow-up that you and I haven't talked about, but it's something that I've been burning about lately. And that is the role of discrimination against, I mean, we know there's still active steering of people, of homeowners who buy properties. We'll just assume that's going on. But the active discrimination against source of income, renters who use rental assistance vouchers have like a 80%, 60% rejection rate in other parts of the country, including LA. And it actually contributes to a displacement and resegregation if we ever were integrated. I mean, we used to perhaps be somewhat, but the point is that there's a number of things that might relate to our tenant status. And that is, to me, an act of solidarity around, tying any upzoning, which means densifying any neighborhoods, allowing developers or property owners to add more units by right. That should be tied to things like you've got to show a commitment to actually fairly rent to Section 8 voucher holders, because the city is going to get a bunch of funding for new vouchers, perhaps as many as 400. And the city can, I'm talking about Berkeley Housing Authority, can only actually orient 20 new people a year. They've got a wait list of, I think, 600 or 700 people, closed wait list. So, and majority of them are African American. There's other.
Is there a question?
My question, actually, it was offering this. I was going to add it to the agenda if I could. But Willie, what do you think about that suggestion? Because not everyone who's African American is poor. But what do you think about if BTU considered, or, like great other groups I'm part of, we're considering really strongly advocating for this effort. Carol Morosevich is the person who turned me on to this issue, but I've documented just how bad of a problem it is. And it's a way to make sure.
I think because of the publicized, the public housing does not exist, privatizing public housing, that contribute to the demise of African Americans, certainly. I think that anything that contributes to being able to bring African Americans back to the city, I like to see at least 20% blacks come back. I mean, it's okay to have rich white folks too, but I'm saying 20% blacks in all range of income, but certainly those who have been basically displaced. That could play a role in that, in terms that's a pronged strategy, because you want to be able to have more than multiple strategies. Topa is one, but certainly dealing with actually public housing, or rather vouchers, are another one. But coming up with a sound strategy around being able to be encompassing of that is going to be very critical. If that explains anything better than what I can say on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a question from Megan O'Connell, which is, do the landlords of Berkeley have to take any sort of classes to be licensed to rent in Berkeley, if they even need to be licensed, classes around Berkeley's history or housing vouchers? So there's no requirement in California for, Megan, to answer your question, for anybody to receive any kind of license to be a landlord. Dean Preston, who is a San Francisco County supervisor and used to be the executive director of Tenants Together, which is like the statewide umbrella organization for tenants, did want to require landlords to be licensed in San Francisco. So if Berkeley did something similar, we could require those things like history or housing voucher.
Well, let me put this away. Is that Matthew?
Yeah, sorry, somebody asked a question in the chat.
Landlords are licensed. You have to have a business license at least to basically be in the business of renting. I know that because I'm a small landlord, and we actually apply for a license every year.
Sorry, well, Willie, how much goes into that licensing? Isn't it really mostly for to pay the tax?
It's only a business license, so yes, it's that's it. in terms of being able to acknowledge that you have a business, because essentially renting apartments is a business. Not to say I run it like a business, but the point is it is a business, considering that you need to have, you need to make enough income to maintain the property. And that's a problem too, because a lot of African Americans who actually were able to inherit property or were able to build property, it's kind of like I always laugh when you start using these initials like ADU and all that stuff. Many of the ADUs were built by African Americans in South Berkeley to be able to provide housing for their family or their extended family. That's how our apartment came to be honest with you. It was to house my grandmother who had been evicted. But when you start recreating things and think that they're new, it's not new. A lot of the things, even though you make things more complex, they're not new. Many of the things, that innovations and the creativity that came out of South Berkeley was because people had to survive. They made do what they had at that time. And you'd be surprised the businesses that were created, because blacks could not basically go downtown and be served in a way with dignity. I mean, there are people who tell me these stories about the very fact they go to Hink's store and they try on a hat and they're told you have to buy that. But it's the discrimination that still exists now, and it really is kind of it really dogs me by the fact that I'm always considering the very fact is, what have we made different about Berkeley other than the very fact that it was integrated? But it was not integrated because people were tracked and they were in different classes, but they were in the same building. You can tell me everything about Berkeley in terms of its progressiveness, and I can tell you the latter.
I do want to add something, and then we could probably move on, Julia, but I do want to add something at what you're saying about ADUs, Willie. I had a conversation with former Vice Mayor of Berkeley, Carol Kennerly. She was Vice Mayor in the late 70s and early 80s. And her comment to me recently was, now they're pushing to do ADUs, but when the Black community wanted to do ADUs, the city council was against it. So it's interesting how before it was limited, and now all of a sudden everybody can build ADUs. So she found that very, very,
Well, people like Carol, people like Carl, Anthony, people like Joe, who was actually the director of Housing Authority, who dealt with, obviously, Section 8. These people still live. People like Gus Newport. They're resources. They can tell you about the discrimination, the things that they had to deal with when they were in various particular leadership roles. But it's the duality in terms of the fact that Berkeley has always lived on the myth that they are the most progressive city in the country, or in the world, perhaps.
Well, Willie, thank you very much.
So for folks who just joined, we're posting the sign-in sheet in the chat, which is just a Google form. Please fill that out so that we know you're here. That lets us count you towards the meeting requirements for membership. We've also included the instructions on how to pay dues. Only about half the people on the call have filled out the sign-in sheet. Willie, since you can't see the link because you're on your phone, I'll fill it out for you. But everybody else,
well, he
fill it
could
out
if
if
he
you
was
haven't
looking
already.
at his computer.
Well, I'm looking at my computer right now, but I haven't gotten anything other than Paula's invite, actually.
In
Among
the
other
chat?
things. Well, I'm getting OS.
Did you check the chat?
Well, I'm on a computer, but I'm not using Zoom, so I would assume that someone has to send me a-
because you can, you can use your computer and Zoom on your computer and call in on the phone at the same time if you don't have a microphone or sound on your computer. That's what I used to do before I got my current computer.
Right. Well, I'm kind of a little resistant to technology, but I'm using just a voice. I just called in.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying if you click the Zoom link, it will come up on your computer and you can read the chat and see the people, even though we can't see you.
Well, I guess I'm
And then you
learning
still have
something.
to talk on your phone because you
Right,
wouldn't have
I got
sound.
you. Thank you, Julie. I
You're
just
welcome.
learned something. Thank you.
And I have one other quick thing, so I conferred with Paula. When Leah Simon Weisberg was speaking earlier, she touched on the state law, but due to lack of time, it looks like we forgot one important thing for Berkeley, which is in Berkeley, in order to trigger the eviction moratorium, you do not, emphasis on the word not, need to pay 25% of your rent. Evictions in Berkeley are banned except for reasons related to health and safety, like a threat. Only if a tenant is a threat to the health and safety of other residents, and coronavirus cannot be like having coronavirus can't be cited as that. So only that, and maybe Ellis Act evictions. We're looking into that. So if you've been financially impacted and you're not paying any rent right now, you can't be evicted right now. So we just want to emphasize that because Berkeley has stronger law. Berkeley and also all of Alameda County have stronger laws. So just emphasizing that again, if you live in Berkeley, your landlord can't evict, and you're like not paying any of your rent right now, your landlord can't evict you.
Even if you're not paying rent for reasons other than COVID?
If you're not paying rent for reasons unrelated to COVID, and I'm going to emphasize everything we're saying, we're not lawyers. So always check with a lawyer before you do anything. Right now, there's a total ban on evictions except for those two things I said. So if you just decided like I'm going on rent strike, like if you're going on rent strike for some reason, unrelated to like financial impacts related to COVID, your landlord can't evict you until Berkeley law is when the state of emergency ends. Alameda County law, which also applies in Berkeley, I believe is 60 days after the countywide state of emergency ends. So until both of those end, you can't be evicted. However, if the reason why you are not paying rent is unrelated to coronavirus, then after the eviction moratorium ends, then they would be able to evict you for unless you like paid within I think 3 days.
Okay, clearly, I think that's all anyone can handle right now because, as you said, they really need to consult an attorney or the rent board.
Yeah. But if your landlord
counsel,
if your landlord tries to evict you right now, send us an email at info@berkeleytenants.org with the subject line in all caps, "I am being evicted," and it's probably an illegal eviction. And we will put you in contact with folks to help you through that.
Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is Paula Laverde, who is a member of the Rent Board and a former chair of the Rent Board, and she is going to update us on Topa. Paula?
Okay, everybody. Hello, everybody. I'm trying to share, trying to share my screen here because I wanted to give a brief presentation on what is Topa, and it's not working. Hold shift to collect. Oh, here it is. I'm so sorry. Here. Can everybody see that? Yes. So I'm just going to do a real quick, it's actually a 5-minute presentation on what is Topa. So this is going to be a very high level overview so folks can get an idea. So who is Topa and who's working on Topa? So BTU is on the working group with Topa. And this is just a few of the endorsers. We have Latinos Unidos de Berkeley, BTU, ACE, Alameda Labor Council, SEIU 1021, Sierra Club, East Bay for Everyone, DSA, and Centro Legal de la Raza, Public Advocates. So these are all the groups so far that have endorsed Topa. You know, the mission of the Berkeley Tenants Union is, we have a couple of things. You know, one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure we empower and educate tenants to preserve their rights to stable, quality housing. You know, because Berkeley, like it says, is a better place when people from all walks of life can afford to make Berkeley their home. And so, you know, part of the Berkeley Tenants Union we're dedicated to defending and advancing the rights of Berkeley renters through grassroots organizing, outreach, and policy advocacy. And we believe that housing is a human right, and rent stabilization is the most effective way of affordable housing. And Topa will provide that. With a working group, we want to help produce affordable housing and protect and preserve affordable housing. So why do we want to talk about Topa? Before diving into Topa, it's important to talk about how we got here. We all know that the cost of living is too high in the Bay Area, but we want to identify the specific problems in the East Bay right now that require a policy fix. That is Topa, and these can be boiled down to three things. First, that housing is a crisis, and specifically there is a shortage of affordable housing options for people. The second problem has to do with the way residential property is sold and is purchased in Berkeley and in the East Bay. Right now, it is nearly impossible for renting families to compete with investors when it comes to purchasing a first home. There's a shortage of affordable housing, and purchasing timelines are simply too fast for low-income people and most renters to even participate. So we call Topa, this is a leveling of the playing field. And finally, COVID-19, the pandemic, has brought its own set of challenges to affordable housing in Berkeley. So now more than ever, Berkeley needs to invest in long-term solutions for housing. Like I said, this is a high-level view of what Topa is, but it is a proposed local law that would give Berkeley tenants the first opportunity to buy the rental property they live in, and when the owner decides to sell. Basically, it's the right of first offer and the right of first refusal, and the right to assign the rights to qualified organizations and extended timelines, which means that, let's say the Northern California land, I'm in a building, I'm a 5-unit building. The landlord decides that they're going to sell. They inform the tenants. We need to form a tenant organization. And if we can't pull it off because for whatever reasons, we can actually assign our rights to a land trust who can purchase a building on our behalf. And then we can work with them for us to become the owners of the building, or for us to, maintain it as an affordable building. Topa's policy goals, we have them right there: to prevent displacement of lower income communities of color and marginalized tenants, preserve and create permanent affordable housing and create pathways to ownership for tenants, and promote democratic residential control, such as, co-ops. And we stabilize the neighborhoods, and while this policy is intended to benefit tenants, we also see that this is a benefit for the whole community, as we have a goal of creating a clear process for property owners and protecting their rights. Topa does create permanent affordable housing, not through new construction, but by preserving existing affordable housing and bringing housing into permanent affordability while allowing residents to stay in place, preventing displacement and promoting community stability. And this is important. Topa is not, it doesn't force the owners to sell. So when a property owner decides that they want to get out of the business and they want to sell this particular, building, it doesn't control the cap, and it doesn't prevent owners from selling to their families or heirs. And it applies to owner-occupied single-family homes. So Topa is not eminent domain. So there is a balance. So this is a high overview. If you have any more questions, I would refer folks to yes2topa.org. There's FAQs for tenants, FAQs for property owners, and a longer extended FAQs.
So we already have a couple folks asking some questions in the chat, so I'll read them out loud so you can answer them, Paula. And then, folks, if you have questions about any of the topics, please post them in the chat. So the first question we have is, will Topa also trigger when a holding company changes more than 50% ownership? And I think that's a really good question. Paula, do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer to that. I would have to look at that. So what the question is, if somebody, if it's less than 50% is changing, or all 50%, what was that again?
He asked, well, more than 50%. So I'm posting it in the, so it's more than 50%.
So if someone is owned more than 50% of the company changes more than 50% ownership. You know, when I'm looking at this question, if they're going to sell the building, so if there's some, you know, who is this? Whoever sends this question, I'll be happy to respond to them offline, because I'll have to take a look to find the correct answer for that. Let me get back.
It's Andy Cat. It's Andy Cat. So Andy, we'll get back to. And then the next, and if it doesn't, we can work on that policy, I think. The next question we have is, does Topa make it possible for people who don't have the money to buy property?
So if tenants don't have the opportunity to buy money, because it is going to be costly to buy your apartment, your building, you can give your rights to a qualified organization, such as the Northern California Land Trust, and they will do all the process for the building. And once it's there, then you can get assistance, and you have longer term to see what it is, how the organization or the building is going to do. Maybe they do want to convert into a co-op, and there's that assistance there. But there's assistance. Now there's a place that's an organization that is holding your building, and then you can work with them to see if you can come finally eventually to own your building.
Great. Does anybody else have any more questions? If so, please post them in the Zoom chat, and we'll answer them. If not, we're going to move on, I think.
Yeah, I do want to clarify, you know, it has to be the whole, if you only, let's say you have a 5-unit building and only 2 people are really interested, or, you know, can do it, and the other 3 people can't, then this is also where a role where like a land trust can come in and assist.
And then we also had a question on a different topic, which was on an earlier topic, which was, we had 2 questions. One was, how does the preemption under state law impact the Berkeley eviction moratorium? Will Berkeley be able to extend the moratorium? So I'm going to start by answering the second question first. Berkeley's moratorium, as well as the Alameda County moratorium, don't have specific expiration dates. Berkeley's one says when the local state of emergency ends, and because Berkeley keeps extending that moratorium, the state of emergency from coronavirus, that moratorium is going to basically be indefinite until COVID is sufficiently under control. And then the first part of the question, how does the preemption under state law impact the Berkeley eviction moratorium? Berkeley's one is largely unaffected. How the main way it's preempted is just, it makes it a bit difficult for us to add on any new protections that we didn't have in place by August 18th, is the main way that it's preempted local protections. So like Orange, let's say Orange County, where they didn't have any protections, if suddenly like in November an all Democratic Board of Supervisors had somehow been elected, tenants there would not be would still be screwed. But in Berkeley, because we passed stuff early last year, with a lot of lobbying from BTU, for instance, we got it in before we had to worry about stuff. And then they had another question, which was, can a landlord change the terms of a lease, parentheses, require a new lease with the same rent under the eviction moratorium? I believe the answer is that those things are not going to be affected by the eviction moratorium. I hope Paola can maybe better answer this. And again, I'll emphasize that all of our answers we're not lawyers, but I think that it's going to, like, if you're under the rent control ordinance, or the eviction protections of the rent control ordinance, then that'll govern it. And if not, I don't know. So, but again, talk to a lawyer, please. We have some more. We have a lot more questions as well. So I'm going to keep answering. Betsy asked, will the rent board have oversight of properties under Topa purchases? The rent board is not going to.
That is still being worked out on where the legislation this is still just legislation for Topa. Actually, there is something I did omit from asking folks. So this is legislation, but it is being proposed. It's going to go before the City Council on April 20th, 4/20. And the City Council is going to vote on it. The question was, so a follow through for what we would like to ask our membership is that on the 18th, the Topa legislation is going to go before the Land Use Housing and Committee for the City Council, and we would like our members to either, and we will be sending out information to all our membership, but to write letters to their city councilors, please endorse Topa. It is an opportunity that tenants don't have, that will have. You can either send a letter or call into on the meeting.
Okay, we need to move
Right,
along.
and Paula, that's February 18th, this Thursday, correct?
You know, we have another speaker, so we need to move along here.
Okay, we have one more question on the Topa thing, which is, in the case of a nonprofit owned property, technically can it sell to only another nonprofit? Does that include a resident owned cooperative? And then they clarify, but like, are there any restrictions on what a nonprofit board can do with property, its property? This is for Topa.
You're muted, Paula.
Okay, if she muted herself, I will need to unmute her. Paula, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, regarding the cooperatives, I can get back to you on that question. So do we have the name of the person? I'll get back to them on that question. You could also email, I'm going to also put on the chat the email address for the Topa website, because like I said, there's an FAQ there. But if you'll give me the name of the questioner, I can email them back directly and I can respond to them on that question.
Igor, do you have a question? Igor? Matthew, unmute Igor.
I just did.
Thank you. I have a potential answer since the Bay Area Community Land Trust is part of this effort. I can only imagine that there is a potential social housing component to this. That's how Topa was initially intended. So while we'll see what kind of legislation comes out, taking the structure into a cooperative structure is certainly one possibility.
Thank you, Igor.
Okay. And we have one more question. Is there
well, we're running out of.
Yeah, we're running out. We have two people now ask. I think we'll have to leave it to the end so that we can get to our next speaker.
Okay. So you're not going to present us with any more questions. Okay.
No.
Our next speaker is Eddie Ituarte. Did I say it right, Eddie? He's from the Oakland Tenants Union, and he's going to update us on what they are doing. Oh. Oh, shoot.
What happened, Julia?
Well, it's this timer that won't shut up. There. Well, it still won't shut up. Well, I'll put it down on the floor where you can't hear it.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It doesn't have a stop. Okay, Eddie.
Okay, I unmuted myself. So thanks very much for the invite to the Tenants Union. I'm Eddie Ituarte, and let's see. Emily Wheeler was here for a little bit of time, and I think she has left. She's also a member, and also we have Corinne Erickson. who's also available right now or is on this call, this Zoom call. So the Tenants Union, we do mostly, I think the strength of the Tenants Union is that we've been a policy organization in the sense that we've worked very much over the years with initiating changes or really new things in the law. Like for instance, we were the first organization to actually bring together a lot of other organizations to get a just cause law to be voted on by the citizens back in 2001. So I think what our strength has been is that we've made alliances with other organizations, and we could never do these things on our own, obviously, but other organizations like ACE and Just Cause Oakland and the East Bay Community Law Center, in different ways they've contributed their talents and ideas, and so so I would emphasize that, and I think you folks know this, that it's making alliances with other progressive groups like the folks from Adeline. So over the years, we have worked on making additional additions or revising the Oakland rent law. For instance, we've lobbied in the past to have the CPI finally come to this to what it is now, where it's based, where rent increases are based on the consumer price index. When the law first went into effect, there was a 10% increase that was allowable at that time. We've also been able to cut down on the number of the kinds of exemptions to the rent law. For instance, 2 or 3 unit buildings owned by owners were exempt. We've lobbied to remove that exemption. A couple of other exemptions we've removed. Right now, our focus currently is either eliminating or weakening the banking part that allows for landlords to increase rents based on banking, when they haven't increased rents in 1 year, they could bank it from the previous years. And so we're trying to either get rid of it or soften that up. And also, as Paula ran down the Topa, we're doing a similar thing in Oakland. And so that's another thing we're working on with other organizations. So let's see if other points. Oh yeah, we've a lot of our work has been done, and this is important for you folks. I think you're doing it. You have Paula there from the rent board, along with Leah. But we've been following our particular rent board for years and years, and I think we've been successful in that. There's been some really obnoxious landlord people that were on the rent board, and I think because of our criticism, we've been able to have them kind of removed. So I think that's important for you folks to. I think your rent board right now is just stronger based on membership, but and over the years we've had yes, Paul, over the years we've had perhaps the rent board has gotten better, because it's really important, because 2 things we do with the rent board is we lobby them to pass regulations or revise regulations to the rent ordinance. And also we also keep careful attention to appeals that are not settled in rent board hearings or go to the rent board itself. And then so we have been quite critical over the years over what we feel are mistakes that have been done by both the rent board staff, the hearing officers, and the rent board members that we feel have made wrong decisions. So we've been, and I just to close it up, the other thing we're doing is we have a pretty good system of taking inquiries from tenants. And we do it through the telephone, we do it through email, and also we're doing virtual workshops every other Sunday, 3 to 5. And so we're getting more and more tenants. And I think the rough number I did last January, in the month of January, we served, or we had about around 170 inquiries that came through us through different ways. And most of these people had valid questions, and I think we were able to get good information to our tenants through doing that. So I think that is a pretty valuable service we do, because in these days, I don't know how it is in Berkeley, I would think it's the same way. People just don't know what the laws are. And so, so we also, like yourselves, we're not attorneys, and so we will very often have, we do have a list of attorneys, tenant attorneys we send them to. Although we do have an attorney that works for public advocates who does come to our some of our virtual workshops on Sundays. And if I can, Emily Wheeler is from the Tenants Union is now on. So if I don't know if you guys would want to hear from her. Thank you for inviting us.
I just want to add something. I thank you, Eddie, for your presentation. I think we're good. I wanted to just share something that the Berkeley Rent Board did last year, and it was up to the voters of Berkeley, but the Rent Board did recommend what was ultimately known as Measure MM. And Measure MM, which was passed by the Berkeley voters, requires now the registration of all rental housing in Berkeley. That includes anything that was built after 1980. And so I would encourage, and it went on the ballot in November. So if there's any way that the Oakland Tenants Union, it's something we supported at BTU, but if, you know, to hopefully help the Oakland Tenants Union so that you can also get this long range registration, we can help.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Have you unmuted Emily so she can speak?
Well, yeah. Just the only thing I wanted to add were we were also instrumental in passing Oakland's very strong eviction moratorium, and I also just wanted to say that the email helpline and the hotline, Eddie almost single-handedly does that, and he's a rock star.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Well, thank you, Eddie and Emily. That was very informative, and congratulations on moving forward, Oakland Tenants Union.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one final thing, Julia.
Okay.
We've had the idea of somehow doing regional work with other similar organizations. Probably BTU is the one that's closest to us. So we would still be open to that, although you know, there's no definite ideas as to how we could do that. But in the future, I'd like to see something like that. So that's just my final thought I wanted to present you guys. Okay. And thanks again. And you have a nice turnout today. And I'm glad to see that you folks are here and able to listen to us and do the business you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation. We'll take it under consideration, particularly when this pandemic is over. That is the end of our regular presentation. Paula, as she mentioned earlier, has a 3-minute, is that it, Paula? 3-minute video that she will, and in honor of Black History Month. So if you would like to stay and share that with us, we'd be happy to have you hang around. Paula?
Sure.
Explain it and then show it.
Sure. I'm trying to share my screen. So this is a 3-minute, 10-second video on on Byron Rumford. Willie referred to him during our meeting. Byron Rumford was the first African-American or Black legislator in Northern California, and he is considered the father of housing in Berkeley. I mean, in all of the state of California. I mean, because of him, we have the anti-housing, the laws and anti-discrimination laws. So let me play this. Hopefully everybody can hear it.
You can never whip these bugs if you don't keep you and them separate. I found that out running it. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
For the generation growing up today, I don't think they really understand what racial segregation was like in terms of the many, many ways in which Black people were simply second-class citizens.
It didn't matter how much money you had, how intelligent you were. If your skin was brown, opportunity was denied.
The unions wouldn't let you in to get a union card. I'm talking about the plumbers, the electricians.
At the time, there were no mayors, no city council members. We didn't have people on school boards, or we didn't have people on boards or commissions. There was basically no Black representation in Northern California. At the time, they had all the covenants for the restricted housing, but no one admitted that it was there or that it was a problem.
I don't think Dad really had any personal desires to run for public office, but the community meetings resulted in him being drafted to run for the Assembly District. And the 1948 general election, he was elected, and so that started his political career in the 17th Assembly District.
New legislator, he was Black legislator, and he just moved in there like gangbusters and started coming up with legislation.
When it comes to significant legislation in the history of this state, I would not know of any legislature who achieved the number and the significant passage of bills than Byron Rumford.
Byron Rumford is the father of housing in California. He is a major leader in the world.
From a racial standpoint, he kind of tuned in that, you know, we're being prohibited from living where we'd like or running an apartment where we would like.
His fair housing legislation opened the way for a California Supreme Court decision and for a U.S. Supreme Court decision. And that U.S. Supreme Court decision, of course, was valid in all other states, in addition to California, everywhere.
Byron Rumford was obviously the seed that was planted. He served in the legislature for about 9 terms, which is very unique to be there that long. It was long before term limits came into effect, of course.
You look at people like Jackie Robinson or Martin Luther King or others that are recognized as turning the hands of civil rights and modernizing America. Byron Rumford was certainly one of those pioneers, and Byron Rumford made them confront the reality that there
It's a hoodie.
Well, thank you, Paula.
It's the work from home.
Sorry about that. Let me just get out of here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So thank you for letting me share that. You know, we are repeating times. Now we're, you know, if you don't have enough money, you can't afford to live in Berkeley. So you're discriminated from living in Berkeley because you don't have the money. So thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us, and we will let you know when our next general meeting is going to occur, and we hope to see you back here again. In the meantime, if you are getting, continue to document yourself if you are not paying your rent because of COVID, because it's easier to evict you if you're not keeping your documentation up to date. And for all of us, remember our mask and our distancing, and get vaccinated if you can. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
May I make one more comment? And I would like to invite everybody to next Thursday's rent board meeting. The rent board meetings are every third Thursday, and we are in celebration or in commemoration of Black History Month. We will be providing a special resolution to former Mayor Gus Newport, who was the mayor of Berkeley starting in 1979. And Gus was quite instrumental in making sure that, you know, the progressive chops that Berkeley has now is because some of the things of Mayor Gus Newport and his leadership. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Cool. Yeah, and as
Bye-bye.
a reminder, before folks sign up, if you haven't already filled out the sign-in sheet, please do so we can mark you so that like we can count you as having attended a meeting so you can vote in our membership votes moving forward.
Oh. Okay, Dee.
Paula, Julia, do you want to stay on after the meeting in order to debrief?
Sure.
Okay. And then do we have okay, and I'll send you do you have time to answer the one question that didn't get answered?
No, we're done. Thank you, Matthew.
All right.